What makes analog horror so much better than traditional mediums of horror? Well, the answer is quite simple. Lack of limitations. More traditional forms of horror, i.e. shows and movies, are limited by two major factors: audience and budget. And a secret third factor I'll talk over in a bit. First up is audience, and the most obvious. One of the major roadblocks, not even for horror, generally for all forms of media, is the audience. Problem is, for more traditional forms, you generally have to appeal to the lowest common denominator, i.e. the widest possible audience imaginable. It's why so many shows nowadays are either complete slop or devolve into a complete slop. Traditional media is tied down a lot more by their audience. And while yes, there are gems out there that do have incredibly intelligent storylines that make you reconsider a lot of very big subjects, these kinds of plot lines are just too much for the lowest common denominator to handle, either making them way too uncomfortable or just going right over their head. Put it simply, anything more complex than gore is gonna scare away a lot of your audience, and this forces writers to make concessions and write, well, poorly written stories, not a lot of substance, because anything further than that would be too much. It's a horror story. And while yes, people watch horror stories to get scared, they don't watch it to get scared at the concepts. They watch it to get scared at the blood. Now, to get into our second major reason, money. And this one's also pretty simple. Making a movie is expensive. It is incredibly expensive. You have to rent out a place to make the shots. You have to buy all of the equipment and the props. You have to pay all of your workers. You have to pay all of your actors. You have to hire actors and workers and stagehands. You have to wait for all of that stuff to get shipped to you, or pay extra to get that stuff shipped faster. The only way you can get the money to pay for all of this is either if you shell out a bunch of your own money and put yourself into debt, or if you work with a company that fronts the cost. But either way, you'll have either, well, debt or a company breathing down your neck to do well on this movie. And if you don't make up that money back, well, then you're gonna have to sue for bankruptcy or get sued into oblivion. Corners will have to be cut so you don't financially ruin yourself. And that's not even mentioning the third secret problem, which is regulation. Back in the day, showing anything considered indecent would basically end your career. Your movie wouldn't be shown, and if you can't make ticket sales, good luck making rent. And nowadays, politicians are willing to ban whatever for some quick political points. With traditional media, you're forced to deal with tight margins that make you cut corners with general audiences who don't want to think, with companies and politicians who are itching to wring you dry. Now let's see how analog horror contrasts. For analog horror, the monetary minimum is 2 nickels on a GoPro compared to the millions for a traditional studio. DaVinci Resolve is free and doesn't need a super strong mega computer to run. And because of the nature of analog horror, generally the older the camera, the better, the more you'll be able to capture the analog in analog horror. Most of the time, audiences want to be forced to think. They want a complicated puzzle that requires a lot of effort to put together. If you don't believe me, just look at the Monument Mythos. And audiences usually enjoy being forced to think critically about more uncomfortable topics, as long as those topics are presented tastefully and respectfully, unlike some people do, not naming any names. And when it comes to regulation, while yes, YouTube can and is quite notorious for being very hit or miss with their bans and demonetizations, most of the time you can post anything as long as it's not too explicit, which is basically the whole point of analog horror, delivering an incredible and horrifying storyline through inadvertent means, forcing the watcher to engage and think more critically about the media they're watching, amplifying the horror as it comes from the viewer making a realization, rather than the viewer seeing the 15th gallon of fake blood. Anyways, that's it. That's the entire video. I'm going to eat and review a McChicken at 1,000 subscribers, and I am currently close to like 800, so yeah.